Emeka was a young man full of energy and dreams. He married Chika, a beautiful and hardworking woman from his village. Their wedding was colorful, and everyone in the community came to celebrate. Chika was excited to start her new life with Emeka, hoping they would build a happy home together. She loved Emeka with all her heart and was ready to be the best wife. For the first few months, their marriage seemed perfect. Emeka was kind, and Chika made sure their small home was filled with warmth and love. She cooked Emeka's favorite meals, took care of the house, and looked forward to the day they would start a family. But as time went by, things began to change. One evening, Chika noticed Emeka coming home late, tired, and distracted. He no longer laughed at her jokes or listened to her stories about her day. Chika tried to understand what had changed, but every time she asked, Emeka gave excuses. He claimed he was busy with work and that things would get better. Chika believed him, but deep down, she felt something was wrong. Emeka no longer looked at her the same way, and his gentle touches had turned cold. Chika tried to make things better by cooking special meals and being extra kind, but nothing seemed to work. What Chika didn't know was that Emeka had met another woman in the city. Her name was Ada, and she was everything Tunde thought he wanted. Ada was beautiful, fashionable, and lived in the fast-paced world of Lagos. Unlike Chika, who was simple and traditional, Ada was exciting and brought out a different side of Emeka. Emeka had secretly married Ada, even though he was still married to Chika. He spent his money on Ada, buying her clothes, jewelry, and everything she desired. He rented a fancy apartment for her in Lagos, while Chika struggled to make ends meet at home in the village. While Emeka spent more time in the city with Ada, Chika was left alone in the village. She barely had enough money to buy food, and Emeka rarely sent any home. Chika's friends and neighbors began to whisper about Emeka's absence, but Chika defended him. She believed her husband would come back to her and their love would be strong again. But Emeka didn't return. Instead, he started treating Chika with coldness and even anger. He would shout at her for the smallest things, and sometimes he would raise his hand to hit her. Chika's heart was breaking, but she kept hoping that things would change. The day Emeka first hit Chika was one she would never forget. She had asked him why he hadn't come home for several days, and instead of answering her, he slapped her across the face. Chika was shocked. Emeka had never raised a hand to her before. She cried and begged him to explain what was wrong, but Emeka didn't care. From that day on, the abuse became more frequent. Emeka would yell at Chika, calling her useless and blaming her for everything that went wrong in his life. He even stopped giving her money for food, forcing Chika to depend on her neighbors for help. While Chika was suffering in the village, Ada was living a life of luxury in Lagos. Emeka made sure she had everything she wanted. He showered her with gifts and attention, and Ada enjoyed every moment of it. She didn't care that Emeka had another wife. As long as she was treated like a queen, nothing else mattered. Emeka felt like a king when he was with Ada. He would take her to fancy restaurants and buy her expensive clothes. He was proud to be seen with her, and he felt that his life was complete. But little did he know that his actions were slowly destroying his first marriage. Chika couldn't understand why Emeka was treating her so badly. She had done everything a good wife should do. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for their home, yet Emeka seemed to hate her. Each day, the pain in her heart grew deeper as she remembered the loving husband she had once known. The neighbors started noticing the bruises on Chika's arms and face, but Chika always made excuses for Emeka. She didn't want people to know about the abuse, hoping that if she prayed hard enough, Emeka would change and love her again. One day, Emeka's mother, Mama Emeka, came to visit Chika. She had heard rumors about Emeka's behavior and wanted to see for herself if they were true. When she arrived, she found Chika looking thin and weak, with tears in her eyes. Mama Emeka was heartbroken. She had always believed her son would be a good husband, but now, seeing Chika's pain, she knew something was terribly wrong. She asked Chika what was going on, but Chika only cried and refused to speak. Mama Emeka promised Chika that she would talk to Emeka and make things right. When Mama Emeka returned to Lagos, she went straight to Emeka's office. She had heard about Ada and knew that her son had taken a second wife without anyone's knowledge. Mama Emeka was furious. She had raised Emeka to be a responsible man, and now he was destroying his marriage to Chika. When Emeka saw his mother, he tried to avoid her, but Mama Emeka wasn't having it. She demanded to know why he had betrayed Chika and married Ada. Emeka tried to defend himself, saying that Ada made him happy, but Mama Emeka wouldn't listen. She warned Emeka that if he didn't change his ways, he would lose everything. Despite his mother's warnings, Emeka continued to live his double life. He refused to leave Ada, and his treatment of Chika grew worse. He would come home drunk, yelling at her and accusing her of being a burden. Chika's heart was shattered, but she stayed in the marriage, hoping that someday Emeka would come to his senses. Mama Emeka was deeply disappointed in her son. She prayed for him every day, hoping that he would realize his mistake before it was too late. But Emeka's pride and greed for the lavish lifestyle with Ada blinded him to the pain he was causing Chika. At night, Chika would cry silently in her room. She missed the Emeka she had fallen in love with, the kind, caring man who used to bring her flowers and laugh with her under the stars. Now, all that was left was a cold, angry man who only saw her as a burden. Chika wondered what she had done wrong. She replayed every moment of their marriage in her mind, trying to find a reason for Emeka's change. But no matter how hard she thought, she couldn't find the answer. The sadness in her heart grew heavier each day. Meanwhile, Ada was beginning to show her true colors. She was no longer satisfied with the gifts and attention Emeka showered on her. She wanted more. More money, more luxury, more of everything. Ada began to demand that Emeka leave Chika and marry her fully, without the secrecy. Emeka was torn. He didn't want to leave Chika completely, as she still held a place in his life. But Ada's demands were growing louder. The pressure began to weigh on Emeka, and for the first time, he started to feel trapped by the choices he had made. As Emeka spent more time with Ada, Chika's loneliness became unbearable. She no longer recognized the man she had married, and her life had turned into a nightmare. The emotional and physical abuse was taking its toll on her, and she had no one to turn to for help. Chika tried to reach out to her family, but she was too ashamed to tell them the truth. She didn't want to admit that her marriage was falling apart. Instead, she suffered in silence, hoping that one day Emeka would realize the pain he was causing and come back to her. In the village, people had started talking about Emeka's behavior. They whispered about how he had abandoned Chika and taken another wife in the city. Some people pitied Chika, while others blamed her for not being able to keep her husband happy. Chika overheard these whispers, and each one cut deeper into her already broken heart. Despite the gossip, Chika held her head high. She didn't want people to see how much she was hurting. But inside, she was falling apart. Every day felt like a battle, and she didn't know how much longer she could go on like this. As Ada's demands grew, Emeka began to feel overwhelmed. He had thought that having 2 wives would make him happy, but now he was starting to see the consequences of his actions. Ada was never satisfied, and Chika was a constant reminder of the life he was trying to escape. Emeka became more frustrated and angry. He would lash out at Chika for the smallest things, blaming her for his unhappiness. Chika, who had once been his rock, now seemed like a burden to him. He didn't realize that it was his own choices that were causing his misery. One evening, after another fight with Emeka, Chika reached her breaking point. She couldn't take the abuse any longer. She had given Emeka everything, her love, her trust, and her loyalty, and in return, he had broken her heart. Chika decided that she needed to take control of her life, even if it meant leaving Emeka. With tears in her eyes, Chika packed a small bag and left the house. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay in that toxic environment any longer. As she walked away from the home they had built together, Chika felt a mix of sadness and relief. Chika walked to her friend Chioma's house, hoping that she would find some comfort there. Chioma was shocked to see Chika in such a state and welcomed her with open arms. Chika finally opened up about the abuse and betrayal she had been enduring, and Chioma listened patiently. Chioma encouraged Chika to stay with her for a while and take time to heal. She reminded Chika that she was strong and didn't deserve to be treated that way. Chika was grateful for Chioma's kindness and began to see that she didn't have to suffer in silence anymore. When Emeka returned home that night, he was surprised to find the house empty. Chika was gone and her belongings were missing. At first, Emeka was angry. How dare Chika leave him? But as the hours passed, his anger turned to fear. He had never thought Chika would actually leave him, and the thought of losing her made him panic. For the first time in a long time, Emeka realized how much he had taken Chika for granted. He had been so focused on Ada and his own desires that he hadn't noticed the pain he was causing his wife. Now, Chica was gone, and he wasn't sure if he would ever get her back. Desperate to find Chica, Emeka began searching the village. He went to her friends' houses, asking if anyone had seen her, but no one was willing to help him. The people in the village knew how poorly Emeka had treated Chica, and they weren't eager to help him now. Emeka's pride was wounded, but more than that, he was starting to feel the weight of his mistakes. He had lost the trust and respect of the people around him, and now he was losing the woman who had always stood by his side. While Emeka searched for her, Chica was slowly beginning to heal. Chioma had taken her to see a counselor in the nearby town, and for the first time, Chica began to talk about her feelings. She had kept so much pain bottled up inside, but now she was learning to let it go. The counselor helped Chica understand that the abuse wasn't her fault. She had done nothing wrong, and she deserved to be treated with love and respect. Chica's heart was still broken, but she was beginning to see a future where she could be happy again. While Emeka was dealing with the fallout of Chica's departure, Ada was busy with her own plans. She had grown tired of Emeka and his inability to meet her endless demands. Ada had met a wealthy businessman who promised her even more luxury than Emeka could provide. Without hesitation, Ada left Emeka and moved in with the new man. She didn't bother to tell Emeka, and when he eventually found out, he was devastated. Ada had used him for his money and then discarded him like he was nothing. Emeka was left with nothing. No wife, no lover, and no peace. Emeka's world was falling apart. Ada had left him, and Chica was nowhere to be found. He was alone, with only his regrets to keep him company. Emeka began to realize how much he had hurt Chica and how foolish he had been to believe that Ada could ever replace her. The once proud and confident Emeka was now a shadow of himself. He wandered the streets, lost in his thoughts, wondering how he had managed to destroy his own life. Emeka wished he could turn back time and undo all the wrongs he had done, but he knew it was too late. As the weeks passed, Chica grew stronger. She no longer felt like the weak, broken woman who had been trapped in an abusive marriage. With Chioma's support and the guidance of her counselor, Chica was beginning to rebuild her life. She had found a job at a small shop in town and was starting to earn her own money. For the first time in a long time, Chica felt a sense of independence. She didn't need Emeka to survive, and she was determined to create a better future for herself. One day, Emeka finally found Chica. He had heard from a friend that she was staying with Chioma, and he went there hoping to talk to her. When Chica saw Emeka at the door, her heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him, but she knew that she needed closure. Emeka fell to his knees and begged for Chica's forgiveness. He told her how much he regretted everything he had done, and how he had realized too late how much he loved her. But Chica wasn't the same woman who had once waited for Emeka to change. She listened to him, but she didn't feel the same way anymore. After listening to Emeka's apology, Chica knew she had a decision to make. She could choose to forgive him and go back to the life she had known, or she could move forward and create a new life for herself. Chica had loved Emeka deeply, but the pain he had caused her was too great to forget. With tears in her eyes, Chioma told Emeka that she forgave him, but she couldn't go back to the way things were. She had found a new strength within herself, and she was ready to move on. Emeka was heartbroken, but he knew that he had only himself to blame. Emeka walked away from Chica, feeling more regret than he had ever felt in his life. He had lost the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Emeka spent many nights alone, thinking about all the mistakes he had made. He realized that he had been selfish and foolish, chasing after a life of luxury and excitement, while ignoring the woman who had stood by his side through everything. Emeka wished he could go back in time and be a better husband to Chica, but it was too late. Chica, on the other hand, was ready for a new beginning. She had learned so much from her experience, and she knew that she deserved a life filled with love, respect, and happiness. Chica was no longer the broken woman she had once been. She was strong, confident, and ready to face whatever the future held. Chica decided to stay in the town and continue working at the shop. She had made new friends and was building a life for herself. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to create a future filled with hope and joy. When the people in the village heard about Chica's decision to leave Emeka, they were surprised. Many of them had expected her to return to him, as was the custom in their community. But Chica had shown them that she was different. She had chosen her own path, and the people in the village began to respect her for it. Some women in the village even looked up to Chica, seeing her as a role model for standing up for herself. Chica's story became an example of strength and resilience, and her bravery inspired others to take control of their own lives. As time went on, Emeka found himself increasingly isolated. Ada had left him, and Chica had moved on. The people in the village no longer looked at him with respect. Many of them knew how he had treated Chica, and they wanted nothing to do with him. Emeka's once proud reputation had crumbled, and he was left with nothing but his regrets. He spent his days alone, thinking about all the people he had hurt and all the opportunities he had wasted. Emeka wished he could turn back time, but he knew that he couldn't. As Chica continued to build her new life, she found herself growing in ways she had never imagined. She became more confident in her abilities and more sure of herself as a person. Chica was no longer defined by her past or her relationship with Emeka. She had created a new identity for herself, one that was strong, independent, and full of hope. Chica's heart had healed, and she was ready to embrace the future. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was no longer afraid. Chica had learned that she could face anything life threw at her and come out stronger on the other side. Emeka wandered through the village, haunted by the choices he had made. He had lost everything that mattered to him: his family, his reputation, and his peace of mind. Emeka couldn't believe how blind he had been, chasing after Ada while abandoning Chica. The regret in his heart grew heavier each day, and he wished he could turn back time. But no matter how much he wished, Emeka knew that some things couldn't be undone. He had to live with the consequences of his actions, even though it was painful. As months passed, Chica's life blossomed. She had saved enough money from her job to open a small shop of her own, selling foodstuffs and household items. Her business grew steadily, and people from the village began to admire her entrepreneurial spirit. They saw her as a strong woman who had overcome hardship and carved out a new path for herself. Chica's shop became a gathering place for women in the village. They came to buy goods, but also sought her advice. Many looked up to her, inspired by her courage and perseverance. Chica felt proud of what she had achieved, knowing that she had built her success with her own hands. While Chica was thriving, Emeka's life continued to spiral downward. His business ventures in the city began to fail, and he was running out of money. Ada's departure had left him with debts, and his once flourishing life was now a mess of unpaid bills and broken promises. Emeka tried to rebuild his life, but nothing seemed to work. He could no longer rely on his charm or his connections. The friends who once flocked to him when he was successful had all disappeared. Alone and struggling, Emeka began to feel the weight of his choices more than ever before. The elders in the village had watched Emeka's downfall with disappointment. He had once been a promising young man, but his betrayal of Chica and his involvement with Ada had led to his ruin. The elders believed that Emeka had brought shame not only to himself, but to the entire community. They called a meeting to discuss Emeka's actions and the lessons that the younger generation could learn from his story. The elders hoped that Emeka's fate would serve as a warning to others, that dishonesty and betrayal could only lead to destruction. One afternoon, Chica's parents came to visit her. They had heard about her success and wanted to see the life she had built for herself. When they arrived, they were overjoyed to see how much she had grown. Chica's mother embraced her with tears of pride in her eyes, and her father smiled warmly, proud of the strong woman his daughter had become. Chica showed her parents around her shop and her home, grateful for their love and support. They had always believed in her, even when she had doubted herself. Now, standing before them as a successful businesswoman, Chica felt a deep sense of gratitude. Emeka, now living in a small, rundown apartment in the city, spent most of his days reflecting on his past. He thought about Chica constantly, remembering the life they had once shared. Emeka realized that Chica had been the true source of his happiness all along, but he had been too blind to see it. The loneliness and regret consumed him, and he wished he could go back in time to change everything. Emeka had lost the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and now he was paying the price for his selfishness and greed. With her business growing and her life full of meaning, Chica found happiness again. She was surrounded by supportive friends and family, and her shop was thriving. Each day brought new opportunities and new reasons to smile. Chica had finally found peace within herself, Although her journey had been difficult, Chika had emerged stronger. She no longer felt the pain of her past, and her heart was open to the possibility of a bright future. Chika had learned that true happiness came from within, and no one could take that away from her. One day, Emeka returned to the village, broken and desperate. He had nowhere else to go, and in his heart, he knew that the only person who had ever truly cared for him was Chika. Emeka went to Chika's shop, hoping to speak with her. When Chika saw him, she was shocked. The once proud and confident man now looked weak and defeated. Emeka fell to his knees in front of Chika, tears streaming down his face. He begged for her forgiveness, telling her how much he regretted everything he had done. Emeka pleaded for a second chance, hoping that Chika could find it in her heart to take him back. Chika listened to Emeka's plea, her heart heavy with memories of the past. She had once loved Emeka deeply, but the pain he had caused her was too much to forget. As Emeka wept before her, Chika felt a wave of emotion, but this time it was different. With a calm voice, Chika told Emeka that she had already forgiven him long ago, but she could not go back to the way things were. Chika explained that she had built a new life for herself, one filled with peace and happiness, and she wasn't willing to give that up. Emeka sat in silence as Chika spoke, realizing that her words were final. She had moved on, and he had no place in her life anymore. Emeka's heart ached with regret, but he knew that he had no one to blame but himself. He had destroyed the life he had with Chika, and now he had to live with the consequences. With tears in his eyes, Emeka thanked Chika for her forgiveness and stood to leave. As he walked away from her shop, he felt the weight of his mistakes more than ever. Emeka knew that he would never find someone like Chika again. After Emeka left, Chika felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had finally closed the chapter of her life that had caused her so much pain. Chika no longer felt the burden of her past, and she knew that she had made the right decision. She had chosen herself and her happiness, and that was all that mattered. Chika continued to focus on her business and her future. She was surrounded by people who loved and supported her, and her life was filled with joy. Chika had found a new purpose, and nothing could take that away from her. The people in the village stood by Chika after her encounter with Emeka. They admired her strength and resilience and were proud of the woman she had become. Chika's story had touched the hearts of many, and she was seen as a symbol of hope for those who had faced difficult times. The women in the village, in particular, looked up to Chika. They saw her as an example of what it meant to be strong and independent. Chika had shown them that they didn't have to accept mistreatment or stay in unhappy situations. They could create their own paths and find happiness. Emeka returned to the city, but he couldn't escape the emptiness that followed him. His life felt hollow without Chika, and the regrets of his past haunted him every day. He had lost the only person who had ever truly loved him, and now he had nothing left. Emeka tried to rebuild his life, but nothing seemed to work. He felt isolated, abandoned, and filled with regret. No matter where he went, he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. Emeka had learned the hard way that betrayal and selfishness only led to loneliness. As time passed, Chika began to open her heart to the possibility of love again. She had healed from the wounds of her past and was ready to embrace the future. Chika met a kind man named Desmond who respected her and treated her with the love and care she deserved. Desmond admired Chika's strength and independence, and he made her feel valued in a way that Emeka never had. Slowly, Chika began to trust again, and she allowed herself to fall in love. For the first time in a long time, Chika felt truly happy. News of Chika's new relationship eventually reached Emeka. When he heard that Chika had found love again, his heart sank. He had hoped that one day she might forgive him and take him back. But now he knew that it was truly over. Chika had moved on, and there was no going back. Emeka couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. He had let go of the one person who had always stood by him, and now she was happy with someone else. Emeka realized that his greed and betrayal had cost him everything. Chika's relationship with Desmond grew stronger each day. They shared a deep connection built on trust, respect, and love. Desmond admired Chika for her strength and resilience, and Chika felt cherished and valued in a way she had never experienced before. Together, they talked about their future and the life they wanted to build. Chika was excited about the possibilities ahead. She had found a partner who truly supported her, and she knew that they would create a life full of love and happiness. Emeka, sitting alone in his small apartment, finally realized the depth of his mistakes. He had spent so many years chasing after things that didn't matter, only to lose the one thing that truly did, Chika's love. Emeka knew that he would never find peace until he fully accepted the consequences of his actions. With a heavy heart, Emeka acknowledged that Chika had moved on and built a better life for herself. He was happy for her, even though it pained him to know that he could never be a part of her new life. Chika's life was now filled with joy. Her business continued to thrive, and her relationship with Desmond brought her happiness she had never known. Chika felt at peace with her past and excited about the future. She had overcome so much, and now she was ready to embrace the blessings life had to offer. Chika knew that her journey hadn't been easy, but it had made her stronger. She had learned to value herself, and she knew that she deserved all the happiness she had found. Chika was finally free from the pain of her past, and her heart was filled with hope. Emeka's story serves as a reminder of the consequences of betrayal, selfishness, and greed. His decision to abandon the woman who loved him in pursuit of temporary pleasure led to his downfall. In contrast, Emeka's journey teaches us that strength, self-respect, and resilience are the keys to overcoming life's challenges. Chika's life transformed because she chose to value herself and seek a better future. Her story reminds us that no matter how difficult life gets, we have the power to rise above our circumstances and find happiness. Emeka, on the other hand, learned that once trust is broken, it can be impossible to rebuild. The choices we make define our future, and we must choose wisely. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.